He was the man with the crown, he who spoke royal law and carved destinies with a single decree. He banished her from the palace, as if exiling a bad season, sending her into the world with nothing but the dress on her back and the rumor of a scandal to her name. But kings misunderstand one thing. When you strip a woman of court and comfort, you teach her how to survive without mercy and how to wait. Years later, she returned not as a suppliant, but as a presence that unsettled the tapestries, a quiet storm carrying ledgers, loyalties, and truths that polished crowns are meant to hide. What follows is not a simple tale of revenge. It is a slow, surgical unraveling of power. And when the first secret falls, the whole kingdom trembles. If you want the full story of betrayal, power, and the price of exile, subscribe now and don't miss what the king never saw coming. The year was 1483. The kingdom of Valmere stood at the height of its splendor. Its markets were gold-lit, its court perfumed with the arrogance of victory, and its king, Aldrich IV, was adored as much as he was feared. Behind the thick stone walls of the citadel, whispers moved like smoke through corridors lined with tapestries of conquest. But the name most often carried in those whispers was not the king's. It was hers, Lady Elara of Rosethorn Keep, the woman who once held the king's trust, and perhaps, more dangerously, his heart. Elara had not been born into nobility. Her father, a scholar of low birth, had taught her languages, diplomacy, and the fine art of silence, skills that made her invaluable at court. She rose from a translator in the royal library to the king's chief envoy, known for her uncanny ability to read people and turn enemies into allies. But her brilliance came with a cost: the envy of courtiers and the quiet resentment of Queen Isolde, whose grace was matched only by her jealousy. It began with a letter, forged but convincing. It suggested that Elara had conspired with the rival Duchy of Renvale to betray Valmere's military secrets. The court erupted in accusation. Elara, brought before the council, stood silent as venomous eyes demanded her confession. She knew the letter was false. She knew who had written it: the king's cousin, Lord Cassian, whose ambitions stretched beyond loyalty. But in the court of Aldrich, truth bent easily under the weight of fear. The king did not look at her when he spoke the words, "By my hand, Lady Elara is stripped of title and estate. She is to leave Valmere by dawn. No trial, no defense, no final word between them." That night, she packed her few belongings under torchlight, her hands trembling, but her eyes dry. From the highest tower, she saw Aldrich's shadowed figure at the window of his chamber, motionless, turned away. The snow began to fall, covering the courtyard as she was escorted out under guard. The iron gates shut behind her with the sound of finality. Exile did not kill her. It forged her. For years, Elara wandered through border towns, surviving by her wits and her gift with language. She worked for merchants, then diplomats, eventually entering the service of Renvale itself, the very land she'd been accused of betraying Valmere to. Yet she never forgot the faces of the men who had condemned her. She learned how letters could destroy reputations, how alliances were written in ink, and how power truly worked. Not through swords, but through secret. 5 years later, Valmere began to crack from within. The king's treasury was bleeding silver, the court divided by whispers of corruption, and Queen Isolde's health was failing. The once mighty Lord Cassian had become the most powerful voice in the council. and rumors claimed the king's mind had grown frail with regret. When news reached Renvale that Valmere sought foreign financiers to save its crown, Elara saw her moment. She returned disguised, not as a noble, but as a representative of a trading consortium. No one recognized her at first. Time and distance had sculpted her into someone colder, sharper. Her dark hair was tied under a merchant's hood, her voice controlled, every gesture deliberate. The guards at the city gates inspected her seal, stamped by Renvale's chancellor himself. She was granted passage into the very kingdom that had cast her out. Inside Valmere's walls, she felt the air heavy with decay. The courtiers who once whispered against her now moved like ghosts, cautious and fearful. Even the great hall looked smaller, its gold dulled by years of neglect. When she was presented before the Royal Council as a representative of Renvale's Merchants' Alliance, Lord Cassian himself greeted her, unaware of who stood before him. His arrogance remained intact, his laughter brittle as glass. "Ah, the traders from Renvale," he said. "Valmere is always open to profitable friends." Elara bowed, her eyes calm. "And Renvale is open to those who understand that friendship has a price." Over the following weeks, negotiations began. Trade routes, grain tariffs, debt repayments. But Elara's purpose was not commerce. It was retribution. Quietly, she gathered information. The debts owed by Cassian, the bribes taken by ministers, the secret dealings between the Queen's Chamberlain and foreign agents. Every signature, every letter, every hidden sin. She collected them all, threading them into a web that would strangle those who had betrayed her. And then came the night of the winter banquet, the first she had attended in Valmere since her exile. The king, pale and distant, sat at the high table, his crown almost too heavy for his head. When Elara approached to present the formal trade agreement, their eyes met for the first time in 5 years. Recognition flashed, a storm behind weary eyes. The goblet trembled in his hand. He said nothing. Neither did she, but as the music swelled and laughter filled the hall, a single folded parchment was placed before the king's plate, sealed with Renvale's crest. Inside was not a trade agreement. It was the forged letter that had exiled her, the original copy, now bearing Lord Cassian's handwriting, undeniable and damning. The king's fingers froze as he read it, his knuckles whitening. Cassian at the far end of the table caught his gaze, and in that moment, the mask of confidence slipped from his face. For the first time, the whispers turned, not toward Elara, but toward him. And as the bells struck midnight, the doors of the great hall slammed open with the clatter of steel boots. The captain of the royal guard entered, holding a sealed order, signed not by the king, but by the queen herself. "Lord Cassian of Valmere," the captain declared, "you are under arrest for treason against the crown." The hall fell silent, and from her seat among the envoys, Elara lifted her glass of wine, not in celebration, but in quiet acknowledgement. Her return had only just begun. Lord Cassian's arrest sent a ripple of shock through the court that no decree could calm. The man who once whispered in the king's ear was now dragged through the same marble corridors where he had plotted Elara's ruin. Ministers averted their eyes as he passed, and the queen's seal on the arrest order left no room for appeal. Yet beneath the court's performance of justice, a quiet unease spread, for everyone knew that if Cassian had fallen, Someone else had pushed him. In the following days, Elara remained the picture of composure. The Renvale delegation praised her diplomatic grace, unaware of the personal storm that brewed beneath her calm surface. She spent her evenings in her rented chambers overlooking the city, the amber glow of the palace visible through the winter fog. Each night, a rider from the castle delivered copies of council minutes, gifts from a secret ally within. The more she read, the clearer the pattern became. Cassian had not acted alone. His corruption was a branch of something deeper, something that had hollowed Valmere from within. King Aldrich, meanwhile, was unraveling. Age and guilt weighed on him like armor he could not remove. For years he had convinced himself that exiling Elara was an act of duty, a necessary cruelty to protect the crown's image. But seeing her again, calm, poised, and untouched by the ruin he had sentenced her to, shattered the fragile narrative he had built to survive his own conscience. He called for her privately. They met in the council chamber after midnight, the fire burning low. He dismissed the guards, and for the first time in years, it was just the two of them, the exiled envoy and the broken monarch. "Elara," he began, his voice rough. "I should have known the letter was false. You stood by me when others sought their own gain. I see that now." She studied him, not with tenderness, but with the steady gaze of someone who had learned to measure truth by deeds, not words. "Regret," she said quietly, "is the luxury of those who still hold power. The rest of us must live with its consequences." He lowered his eyes. "Cassian's guilt will not restore what I took from you. Tell me what it is you want. Money? Lands? A title?" She almost smiled. "None of those. What I want cannot be granted, only taken." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber, broken only by the fire's slow hiss. Then she stepped closer, placing a folded document on the table. "These," she said, "are records of the crown's loans from Renvale's financiers." Cassian used royal funds to pay for his estates and left the treasury empty. But if Valmere defaults, the debt becomes Renvale's claim to your ports and trade routes. In 2 years, Valmere will belong to them, unless you make peace with those you've cast aside. The king's face paled. "You mean yourself?" "I mean the truth," she replied. "Restore what was broken, or your crown will rust with it." When she left that night, she expected resistance, denial, perhaps even fury. But the next morning, the palace erupted with news that Cassian had been found dead in his cell. The guards claimed he'd taken his own life, but rumors whispered otherwise, that the queen had ordered it, or that the king himself had silenced the man who knew too much. The truth was a currency everyone traded in, and no one trusted. Days later, the court gathered again, this time for a ceremony of restitution. Before the assembled ministers, King Aldrich declared Elara's name cleared, her title restored, and her estates returned. The words echoed through the hall, a victory carved from patience and pain. Yet even as the courtiers applauded, Elara's expression remained unreadable. Power returned is not the same as power earned. After the ceremony, she visited the royal gardens, the same place where years ago she had stood before her exile. The roses were withered now, their thorns black with frost. She thought of the woman she had been then, loyal, idealistic, naive enough to believe that justice had a conscience. "Do you believe this will heal the kingdom?" a voice asked behind her. It was Queen Isolde, pale, fragile, but still sharp in the eyes. Elara turned. "Healing requires truth, Your Majesty. I only gave it a chance." The queen smiled faintly, though it did not reach her eyes. "You think you've won, but remember, the throne may bend for a moment, yet it never kneels. You have unsettled the balance, and that, Lady Elara, always has a price." Those words lingered like smoke long after the queen left. 2 weeks later, the king fell ill. His decline was swift and inexplicable. Fever, then silence. The court announced it as an ailment of the heart. But when his will was read, it stunned everyone. He had named Elara as regent over Valmere's trade and foreign affairs, effectively giving her control over the realm's future. The queen fainted upon hearing it. Outside, the city bells tolled for the king's passing. Inside, the nobles murmured of manipulation, of revenge, disguised as redemption. And as Elara stood in the great hall, the crown laid upon the velvet beside the throne, she felt the weight of triumph press upon her chest, not as victory, but as judgment. She had taken back everything she'd lost, and more. Yet in doing so, she had become what she once despised, a player in the same cold game of power. She looked up at the empty throne and whispered, "Forgive me, Aldrich. I learned your lessons too well." Outside, thunder rolled across Valmere's skies, not in mourning, but in warning. The kingdom had its new master now. Power, once corrupted, poisons both the hand that wields it and the one that reclaims it. Justice is never pure. It is shaped by those strong enough to survive its price. If this story moved you, subscribe now for more untold histories of betrayal, courage, and the fragile line between justice and revenge.